Here we are with means, working on pre-K still. It's February 4th. And 40. And we are transitioning from the proposal that we looked at, or the random like statutory language that we looked at, to see what are the fiscal impacts. Remember, like the whole reason that we're doing this in this way is to make sort of all the policy trade-offs and any decision more tangible to us. So Ted, thanks. So we have a whole bunch of testimony from Ted. We have a whole bunch of testimony from Emily. If we spend the whole time with Ted and Emily comes back and okay, that's okay. But they've sort of divided the work on this.
Just in case I'm here for a while, might as well plug in. So Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office. Before I jump in, I should clarify that, so what I'm going to do is talk about fiscal impacts primarily at the parent and provider level. And so we're going to be talking a lot about intersections between the system imagined in the proposed language, how that would intersect with CCFAP, and how that impacts the amount of money parents receive for care, and how that impacts how much money providers receive for children for certain types of care. I will also note that different than the language, I was asked to look at what it would be if the payment to private providers was representative of full day care. And so this is different than the 10 hours per week. I would also note that when I was in last time, we talked a bit about the landscape and how it looks under 10 hours a week. And some of the examples will compare to current law. So that'll kind of be implicit in the discussion, if that works. Okay. Screen. Hopefully, okay, when I click, things move. So agenda overview of proposed policy, and where it is similar and where it departs, and a lot of the assumptions implicit in looking at certain scenarios. We are going to do some reviewing of CCFAP and UPK and how payments interact with each other. Going to run through example calculations for families and providers, and then talk through some outstanding questions, certainly not all of them. Y'all are also noting them down. So some of them might be duplicative, some of them might be new. And so key elements we're looking at, right? 3-year-olds are no longer receiving UPK funding. 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds not enrolled in kindergarten would receive, in this case, a full day payment, which in this analysis, the amount is going to be similar to the foundation formula for kindergarten. I had to make a slight change so it was round numbers and we didn't deal in cents because we don't want to do that. This would be paid for from the Child Care Contribution Special Fund. Providers that offer more than the legal minimums can participate in CCFAP. So this is similar to the current education system, right? A public school offers a certain amount per day. They often have a private provider come in and do after school, and they're receiving CCFAP for those additional hours. So a private provider that is providing full day care would, for amount beyond that full day care, receive a CCFAP payment if they provided those extra hours. And yes, flagging again that this is different than the language, which is outlined a payment for 10 hours a week for 35 weeks to private providers.
Just curious, why the exclusion of 3-year-olds? Was that like a financial?
That was
choice, or
in
is there
the language and modeling a response on the proposal that is no one's, but seems to be an exercise for us to consider and see how different policy choices impact the system.
Yep.
I don't feel like that answered the question. It's like, I get it's no one's proposal, but
I
like,
didn't get this.
what is the logic behind the no one who is proposing?
I think when I've heard other people talk about this,
Yes.
the idea was that, if it's moving to a much longer day for 4-year-olds, so it's a much higher financial
Okay,
support
great.
than.
Yeah. No, thank you. I just-
There's also like, if once we get, like, there's developmental, like birth to 3 and 4 to 8,
Yeah.
there's developmental stages and like.
That's what I'm
stuff
trying to
like
get at.
that,
Thank you.
But that's not. I feel like I can argue in absolutely any direction on like every
Yeah.
detail of this entire proposal.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand why that supposal was supposed.
Supposal.
I
Oh, I love a supposal.
That's
Not a proposal, a supposal.
Okay, and to flag the scenarios we're gonna run through, before we review elements of the system, so we have 4, 2 for families, 2 for providers. So for the family, one scenario is that they pay market rate, they don't participate in CCFAP. And the second one is that they have a $225 estimated weekly family share. This is close, essentially the middle. Estimated weekly family share runs from $0 to $425. So I just kind of hit right in the middle to give an example of how it might. I will, of course, note there's an asterisk here for scenarios, right? $225 in an estimated family share doesn't represent comprehensively what a family's experience, if they're in CCFAP, would be under the proposed system. This is just one run of an example to see how the math plays out.
Do you know, I mean, you're taking kind of a midpoint.
Yep.
Do you know in actuality that the people participating in CCFAB now, what the family share is on average? Or this is a hypothetical scenario, but I'm just thinking about how it reflects current practice.
Sure. That's a good question. So broadly speaking, when I looked last night, if we're looking at December 2025 data, there's about 11,600 children involved, which I don't, let me follow up in an email to provide the exact numbers. I don't want folks to write things down, and I'm remembering things in a fugue state last night. But 11,600 children in CCFAP, about a third of, 33% of those have a $0 family share. And then it scales, right? You'll see it scales from there with each $25 increment. There are more people as you are closer in each $25 scale to $0 than as you go up the income scale to higher family shares. So I don't remember the exact amount. It's a couple hundred in each bucket as you move up, and that amount in each bucket decreases as you go up the scale, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. So the two scenarios for providers, and I will note, I didn't run the scenarios for a $0 family share for families, right? Because they don't pay any money. It wouldn't make sense to run that as a scenario. But I did run that and that should be 100% CCFAP. So 2 scenarios. One is all families pay the market rate at this specific provider. And then the second one is all families receive 100% CCFAP. I did not provide a CCFAP scenario for providers because, as I mentioned, the range of people involved in CCFAP, they're different family shares and they're different amounts, and didn't want to, this is like, we're taking the 2 edge cases, or not edge cases. Both these scenarios reflect, right, there are a lot of families who are paying market rate, there are a lot of families with $0 family shares, so we're covering a pretty broad swath, but just at opposite ends of how providers receive revenue.
So
It's a little confusing. You got 100 with a dollar sign for CCFAT.
It should be 100%. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
That is, my apologies on that one.
So.
Yeah, I see.
It's just a typo. It's forgive you.
It's just a typo. This next part, flagging that there is an endless number of kind of assumptions baked into these scenarios. I almost feel like I should read this like the end of a drug ad, right? Like where I just go really quickly and there are all these side effects.
it's very good.
Yeah. So, right. So we're assuming one big assumption here is that by making this, thinking through the exercise, right, by receiving a full day payment for universal pre-K. In many contexts, right, universal pre-K is thought of as an education program. So these students this is making 4 and 5-year-olds resemble kindergartners. And so for CCFAP calculations for the balance of their time, they would be considered school age is the policy choice, flagging that, right? So like if you were to consider changes in the system, does out of the education time, should it be compensated at school age rate or preschool rate? Policy choice.
So just to clarify, if we're using the equal opportunity payment as the base rate, I know there's been tremendous work going on in the early care sector to professionalize the professionals
Sure. Yep.
working in that sector. Is the assumption then that every pre-kindergartner in a private setting would also be having access to a qualified teacher and all the educational supports that are implied by the weight?
That is, I mean, that would be the assumption, right? Because it's in, and I will look to Katie because the pre-qualified private provider refers to the existing pre-K statute, they would have the same requirements. Yes.
And when we provide weight for economic disadvantage, is the assumption that the private provider will now be providing the kinds of programs that a public school district would be expected to provide for a kid who is economically disadvantaged in that setting, if they're being compensated?
Is that a policy question for Katie?
Well, it's just a question. I'm just trying to understand. Yeah. I mean, well, I don't think it's Katie's because it's not Katie's proposal.
Okay.
I'm just trying to understand what we're proposing here.
No one's proposing anything. We're like, you are naming that is a very important question that we need to solve and we will want to solve it. You probably have a particular way you would want to solve it.
No, actually, I don't.
Okay.
No, I think that's
Okay,
your
great.
assumption, but.
Okay.
So just waiting, follow the time.
Well, just waiting, but also what are the implications for program design?
There's at least two on the side.
It actually relates to the foundation plan too.
Very similar.
Would you like to speak, Beth?
Only if you would like me to.
No, please do. I just didn't see you because of it's.
I'll wear brighter colors.
You're.
I wasn't fully paying attention, I'm sorry. So if I'm missing this, I apologize and I will just be quiet. The proposal that you have on the table with the concept of weights, base plus weights, is only applicable to tuition paid to public providers, not private providers.
That's not the question I was asking. The question I was asking is we are assuming funding off of the CFAP Act 6076 subsidies, which pegs the cost of universal pre-K in a private provider as the same as the equal opportunity payment. So we're assuming now that the base, I think that's what this says here. And so we're assuming that a child who is eligible for free and reduced lunch, who is a 4-year-old in a private provider, is going to be accompanied by $30,000, for example. I think that's
I will say that's an assumption that is not in the draft. The draft has AOE and DCF rulemaking to set tuition for private providers. So
what I would interpret this then.
I don't know.
So maybe it would be, yeah, this is saying that the statewide rate that is determined by AOE and DCF is, and you all have made the policy choice that payment should reflect a full day program. We're using as a placeholder the amount that's similar to the base payment in the public school setting, the foundation formula amount. It doesn't reflect any sort of adjustment for weights, English language learners, any of the other associated payments that would have changed things in the public school setting. And that's a consideration for y'all if you wanted to make different base payments based on those characteristics.
But you need an assumption to go forward with.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what
It's a
the
assumption.
assumptions are.
Other assumptions here is that care occurs in licensed centers. The vast majority of pre-qualified private providers are licensed centers as opposed to family childcare homes. So reflecting that component of the system. And as we've been doing in previous testimony, using in all of these examples, the family have one child in care. You remember that in CCFAP, the amount a family pays is based on the family. So each successive child doesn't change the family share. So this, assuming one child just helps clarify the situation.
I think I'm too confused. It says scenarios. Is this one scenario that you're talking about, or this is what? There's a difference between the first bullet, all families pay a market rate and a family share. And then all families pay a market rate and families receive 100% of CCFAP.
So this is saying within the asterisk, we're noting that certain assumptions that apply to each individual scenario. Yes, so there are multiple scenarios. We have certain assumptions that apply globally to these different scenarios and felt I would call them out upfront before we dove into them. But maybe they will illuminate as we get into the scenarios.
Thank you. I'm still confused. Okay.
Question I think would be helpful to put up is how do we evaluate market rate when we're increasing subsidies? I mean, if there's something we've learned from the ACA, it's that when you flush money in to a market, you're going to see growing inflation in the sector.
I think that is also something that the Human Services Committee spent quite a bit of time on 2 years at some point in recent.
2023. Yeah. So yes, we've used a few terms already, but just as a reminder, and the discussion of market rate is a good segue into this definition. The market rate is the amount per week that childcare providers charge a family for care. That amount in the 2024 DCF market rate study is at licensed centers is $325 per week for preschool. The state rate is the total amount that is reimbursed under CCFAP. And so there is a state rate for each age of care, infant, toddler, preschool, school age, and whether the care is full or part-time or extended care, and whether the care is at licensed centers or family childcare homes. And so the CCFAP state rate is comprised of two payments. One is the estimated family share. So this is the amount calculated by CDD that's based on household income and the number of children in the family. CDD looks at those criteria and says, okay, we estimate that you can afford a certain amount for care. And so providers can ask you to collect up to that amount of what you can afford for that care. And so these family shares scale. They start, families get 100% of their care covered by CCFAP and they scale by $25 all the way up to $425 per week. And then this CCFAP subsidy payment is made by CDD to the provider, and it's the difference between the total state rate and the estimated weekly family share. So that balance that the state says that is the amount of financial assistance you will receive. And it's paid by the state to the childcare provider.
And the first one is paid to the family, not to the child.
The first one, the family pays to the provider. Yep.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Oh, the family share.
The family share is paid by
Not the
family.
first bullet point.
Oh, sorry. The market rate is what are you talking about the total?
Think about who gets what money.
Yes. So of the total state rate, it's helpful to think of it as two payments, the family share, families pay that to providers. The CCFAP subsidy, the state pays that to providers. Yes. And so the provider, ideally, if they're collecting the full family share, is receiving that total state rate from those two different sources. And so here is the rate table. As I mentioned, there are differences depending on age, length of care, care setting. And so provided that as reference, these are the current state rates. And then finally, we have the UPK payment, universal pre-K payment. This is 10 hours a week for 35 weeks, and it is set at almost $4,000 for the current school year. And the amount is adjusted for inflation each year. Okay. So moving on to family scenarios. We have two scenarios. One, the family pays the market rate. I'll start with that one. The asterisk here is carrying over the same caveats and assumptions I've already talked about. So I will move ahead unless there are questions. Okay. So in this first scenario, we're going to look at what the family pays under current law. In this example, we talked a little bit, very briefly, about blended versus separated models for how providers allocate their UPK hours. This is a blended program. And what that means is they don't distinguish their UPK hours. And so what that essentially means is that in the market rate context, the UPK payment applies to the family share. And so the family, right, they are paying the market rate of $325. The UPK payment reduces that market rate for families. And so the family balance is $211. And so for 35 weeks of the school year, they're paying almost $7,400 for care. During the summer, right, for 17 weeks, they're not receiving a UPK payment. They're paying the provider market rate. So that's $5,500. And so in total, the family's paying nearly $13,000 for care for that child, the market rate to the provider. We just use the sample market rate, right, in different corners of the state. Families are going to be paying different market rates. This is also for full-time care. So yes. So in the new system, the family is paying $0 for full-time care through their universal pre-K payment. We ran two separate conditions within the scenario, looking at whether the family chooses to enroll in some sort of after-school or aftercare program, right? Reflecting that if it's a full-day payment or a full-day program, providers may offer a calendar similar to schools. And so, you know, the school day ends at 2:30, 3 o'clock, some version of that. And so families may require extra care. And so looking at the cost with after school versus not, without after school, right? They're not paying anything during the school year, but they are paying for some part-time after school care. And this is reflective of the market rate. And so in the new system, without after school, they're paying $5,500 per year. And then with after school, they're paying $11,755. And so in both of these cases, it's less than the current law system, which makes sense. They're receiving a full day universal pre-K program through the school year.
Full
Will you
day,
go back?
full day.
I am leaving that open, right? Because there's currently not a full day program amount of hours specified beyond, right now it's currently set at 10 in law, right? So that would be a policy consideration for y'all, is what constitutes a full day program if you were to move forward.
I wonder, it might help, this is the full cost to a family,
Correct.
but it
Yes.
is not the full cost of the program. I wonder if this makes sense.
Well, I think we're going through, for I think the report that you all wrote sort of went through like, what's the perspective of the family, the district, the provider, and so that's what presentations are gonna be doing.
Yes, and right, this is, since it is,
And I asked, you actually specifically asked me what order I thought it made sense to do the presentation in, and I said the family, provider, school system, state, because that was sort of like the order of smallest to biggest.
yes. And I think this exercise highlights what we'll see in future slides, a bit of foreshadowing, right? Is that in the system, because there's so many interlocking funding streams, that even if you're providing what feels like an expanded benefit, it doesn't always improve, make it cheaper for families. And so that depends on a variety of different characteristics, and it's helpful to see those trade-offs and how policy proposals play out in the system, and then potentially go at a broader level to look at overall kind of fiscal impacts. So since we're now moving into the world of CCFAP, the previous scenario was looking only at the market rate. This slide is just reminding everyone that, as we've discussed before, right, there are different amounts of funding per child that providers receive and families receive from CCFAP, depending on program structure, family demographics, including how the program accounts for their hours, the setting of care, whether it's a full or part-time CCFAP certificate, the number of kids in the family. So we've held a certain number of these kind of steady for the nature of the exercise, but did want to flag, right, this is just one possible permutation in the system. And so I hinted at the blended and separated model. In the blended model, right, childcare providers are, they're combining their childcare and UPK hours until a single unified rate. Where the separated model, they're saying that UPK hours are separate and our tuition is for those non-UPK hours. This is up to the provider. CDD has released a memo, right, outlining how families are supposed to apply those payments depending on the model of program they choose, but they must apply the chosen model consistently to all families. I also wanted to introduce the concept we've been talking about CCFAP in the early care context. CCFAP does also apply to school-age children. Here are the rates. These are the rates we use for modeling within CCFAP. In this exercise, we're assuming that because there's a full-day program, providers would, and families, right, would receiving part-time rates during the school year and full-time during the summer. If it's not a program. A lot of this is just kind of outlining some of the assumptions and providing more context.
So just, does everyone understand the sort of construct here, which I think maybe it's confusing, maybe it's not, I don't know, maybe everyone's following. So after school is considered a CCFAP program. Does everyone catch that? And so like this, like, can you sort of use the words after school in a way that helps it make?
Sure, yeah, it's,
Or, because I feel like calling it, I think if you just think of it in the context of sort of like early care and education, this might be more confusing.
sure, yeah, and after school, thinking about it, yes, the full day program ends at 2:30, 3 o'clock, and then you have after school until the end of the working day. Absolutely.
I think that there's a lot of assumptions about after school. I mean, I think there was a regulatory change that said school-based after school had to be regulated as a childcare if it wanted to receive CFAP. Many school districts have become regulated, dual regulation to support that. Some have also realized that you just reopen their municipal programs unregulated, and they can provide it at a much lower cost. I just think that's a really it's not just CPAP, it's also 21 feet, it's a bunch of other stuff.
Yes, and I'm saying in the context, agreed, and it is more, thank you. In the context of sort of what Ted put up here, I just wanted to make sure people understood that like it was sort of the division between like the school day and the after school day in terms of how the money was moving there. In that scenario.
But we don't know what that provider is, right? So that could be a provider, if it was a public school provider, they could be using a 21C.
Except in this scenario, it's just it's a private provider scenario. We're only in a private provider scenario. We're going to go into a public provider scenario with Emily Byrne. Ted is, so for the like characters at the table, Ted is going to be doing private provider and families. And Emily or Julia are going to be doing public provider and cost to the state, ed fund, et cetera. Is that right?
Yes, and I'd be thrilled to not have to answer questions about public schools.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just comment that when you frame it that way, the implications that public programs are about families. And I just think it.
Oh, no, I don't,
Okay.
it's, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's, and yes, when we're talking about families in this presentation, this is like, since I am the character representative of the private system, this would be for families who are exactly participating and their child is enrolled at a pre-qualified private program. Okay, so all of that out of the way, remember that in scenario one, family that was paying the market rate, saw benefit from this new system. In family scenario number two, the family has a $225 per week family share. The center is using the blended model. We're doing this for, we're going to run through the blended model and the separated model, just for extra fun. And so in current law, right, these calculations may be familiar. The estimated family share is $225 per week. I'm going to hold the hand right next to where I'm talking about. There's a UPK payment of $114 per week. And so the family pays the balance during the school year between their estimated weekly family share and the UPK payment. And so that balance is $111 per week. And if you multiply that by 35 weeks, you get $3,885. During the school year, that UPK payment goes away. It's not available to them. And so they're paying $225 per week for 75 weeks, and that's $3,825. And so their annual cost for the whole year is $7,710. That's under current law. And so we're going to move now on to what it might look like in the new system, the proposal. Oh, sorry, we're going to go to the separated model first. I apologize. In the separated model, the tuition is accounted for separately. And so that UPK payment, you can think of it going directly to the provider. This is a choice that is made by providers. It depends on the market and how they wish to operate. And so since the family does not see that UPK payment, their annual cost is $11,700 per year. This is the most straightforward table in the whole presentation. And I will note that the consideration, right, is that for a provider, if they choose to go to a separated model, the families aren't receiving their UPK family share. And so that may not be attractive to families and they may not wish to enroll in the program. So if you're thinking, oh yeah, why wouldn't a provider just use the separated model? They have to look at their market. So again, in looking at the new system, we're looking at cost during the school year, cost during the summer, and with and without after school care. I can abridge the calculations if you'd like to talk at a broader level, or if the committee would like me to continue to go through line by line in each one. I don't know at this point, what would be most helpful?
What feels useful to folks? Are we ready for line by line or are we still on bigger picture? Is anyone wanting to go line by line right now? Seeing none.
Okay, great. And so since so during the school year, either the family is paying $0, because they're not receiving after-school care. And part of why I pause is I have to keep moving the Zoom window out of the way. Without after-school, they're paying $0. With after-school, they're paying the provider's market rate because their family share of $225 is more than what the provider is charging as a market rate. So they would just pay the market rate rather than going to the CCFAP system and paying more for their after-school care. We talked a little bit about kind of these cases, right, for families where their family share is above market rates. And so that makes the decision of how they participate in each system. So they're paying $6,230 for after-school care. And when you add the $3,825 during the summer, the family that is without after-school care is paying $3,825. And with after-school, they're paying a little more than $10,000. So in these scenarios, what I would like to do is compare quickly, and I'm gonna have to go back and forth on slides. I intentionally kept these ending calculations separate because I didn't want folks to jump to conclusions to say this new system is better or worse kind of overall. I want to say in these specific scenarios, right, this is what they would pay and these are the outcomes. It's a little more work between slides, but I don't want folks to extrapolate. So in the current law model for families that are attending at a blended program, $7,700 is they're paying. Separated model is $11,700. And so you can see that a family with out after school, in every case, the new system is better for them. But if they're participating in after school care because of the interactions between the system, they are paying families in a blended program who are paying that $7,700 would, if they wish to participate in after school care, would pay more. But families in the separated model see a slight reduction in their care. System is quite complicated. And so, to summarize, right, our impacts depend on the individual characteristics of the family. Again, these are just examples. It's just one potential run of how families might interact with the system and how the new system might benefit or make care more expensive, right? And families would react accordingly. For families in the blended system, if they were looking at after school costing potentially more money for them, they might find alternative sources of care, right? Incentives matter. Yes, and would note that there are, depending on some characteristics of families, cost of care over the entire year may be higher than under the current system. So even though you've provided a full day UPK payment, because of the interactions with CCFAP, could end up costing more. Moving on to providers, unless there are any questions. I will note helpfully is that since you've seen the math for families, providers are receiving payments from families. So hopefully this will, a lot of the math will be familiar and less confusing. Same asterisks and caveats on our scenarios, but we're going to look at two scenarios for providers. In one case, all of their families are paying the market rate. And then the second one, all families are receiving 100% of their care covered by CCFAP. So at the market rate, I lied. There's a tie for the least complicated calculation in the slides. So under current law, family that's at market rate for the full year, they are receiving $325 from the family. And so this is assuming the blended model where the UPK payment is reducing the family share. So between the UPK payment or the family's payment, the combination of the UPK payment and what the family's paying during the 35 weeks of the school year adds up to $325. So they're receiving $325 for the entire year. This would be slightly different under the separated model. So under the new system, they are receiving. So I would like to flag. So the weekly payment. So if we take the current foundation formula amount, $15,033, and convert it into a weekly payment, I rounded the number so we didn't have to deal with cents because that would be ferociously annoying. And so that equals $430. You'll remember that the state CCFAP rate for preschool is $439. So just would like to note that with advances in the CCFAP reimbursement rate, it's similar to what the foundation formula is envisioned to be. So for per kid, and all of these calculations are per child. We're not looking at the classroom level quite yet. That might be for another time. The revenue they receive without after-school care is $15,050. If they're also running an after-school program, they would receive $608 per week per child, which with after-school, that in total equals $21,280 during the school year. Since they're not receiving this weekly payment during the summer, they just receive the market rate during that time. And so this table shows those calculations. Without after school, they're receiving $20,000 per kid for the full year. And with after school, they're receiving $26,805 in the new system. And so that's considerably more money for the providers compared to the current system. You will see, so now we're going to run through CCFAP. I'm not going to go line by
So one thing
line.
you're not getting into here, I'm realizing, is that same provider might be receiving a different amount of money for their 3-year-old since we're taking 3-year-olds out of UPK.
Yes, and so that's so the question, right, is does the provider have multiple classrooms? Would you treat 3-year-olds as toddler? Like, how would you manage that whole transition for providers? Do they have multiple classrooms where they can split them into a universal pre-K classroom versus a preschool classroom? Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to, so for provider number 2, their current, if they're receiving 100% CCFAP. So remember that for providers that receive 100% CCFAP, they receive the state rate of $439 under the current law system. They receive an additional $114 for UPK. And so they receive $533 during the school year per child per week. And then in the summer, they just receive the state rate. And so converting that to annual revenue, it's $26,818. In the new system, I ran separate calculations for with and without after school. Depending on the number of hours that are required, in many cases, private providers would have the incentive to operate the equivalent of an after-school program. So if let's say the number of classroom hours is 26, 27 hours for the full day program as a private provider, to get that delta between, let's say they run a 40-hour program, they would want to have the equivalent of an after-school program for these students. And so if they do have an after-school program, they're receiving $634 per kid. And so during the school year, that's $22,190 during the summer. They are just receiving the school-aged payment, right? Because we've converted these kids to school-age children. And so that's a little bit more than $6,300. And so with and without after school, you'll see without after school, it's $21,357 per kid. And with after school, it's $28,497 per kid. And so compare that to the current system, where the provider with 100, who's enrolled a child who receives 100% CCFAP. With after school, it's more money, but without an after school program, they would receive less revenue because of the way payments stack with UPK. And we are out of scenarios, which we made it. This is just some additional questions. There have been a lot of, hopefully this exercise has helped illuminate how this would, some of the complications of considering this type of proposal. We discussed a bit about how would you deal with 3-year-olds who are no longer part of the universal pre-K system in this proposal. A lot of secondary questions in that bucket. Yes, and so to Representative Holcomb's point, right, would private providers receive differing compensation for different groups of students if they're economically disadvantaged, English language learners, et cetera? And then if folks may, like, how would, if this is envisioned to be administered through CDD, how would those differing characteristics be recognized? And then how would the payments be administered? Full set of questions there. Yes, and then there are school age programs, if they're regulated as a school age program, have slightly different licensing regulations than early care programs. And so how would you manage that tension? But those are just some questions that I thought of when I was going through here. There are certainly more. Questions?
Where am I? How many children are being served by UPK now?
But UPK now, it's approximately, there have been a lot of discussions, and it's depending on whether you're considering enrollment versus ADM. There's a whole math that the public school, and Emily, I think, has the slides. As far as I understand, the number is about 7,600 based on the most recent data. But Emily Byrne
Has that as part of her slide.
has that as part of her slides. And so we can go to that.
She has not returned.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. I
Yes.
think appropriations ate her.
Yes. And for additional context, approximately, Emily will go into this in her slides, but of that roughly 7,600 students, half of them are in the private system.
How many children are there that are 4 years old?
I'll have to get,
Okay.
Emily said it recently and it just
I know,
skipped
okay.
my brain.
Me too.
Yeah. Yep.
This all seems unbelievably complicated.
It is. Yes.
Is there an easier way?
I think one of the challenges there, I hope, there may be a simpler way. I think one of the challenges, and it is incredibly complicated. It's incredibly complicated for me. And as you all know, I spent time working in the system. It's hard. It's hard for everyone.
I have a lot of confidence in you, and I appreciate all the work you did for this, but it is incredibly complicated.
Yes, I agree 100% with that sentiment. And I think, yes, the challenges are, right, is that this system, you have combined funding streams and you have dual systems of oversight, and they're very intertwined. And so anytime you pick one element of the system, it creates all of these unintended consequences in other parts of the system. And so it resembles other conversations that y'all have had for sure, but
And I think there's been, like a huge amount of how state government is administered is like incredibly blended, confusing funding sources. Because families sort of step into being one of the sources of that blended funding in this context, I think it makes it, the confusion is more obvious to us and we, yeah.
I have another.
In some ways,
question.
sort of like, healthcare, right? There's like the insurance and then there's the patient and then there's like all of the ways that the state subsidizes or doesn't subsidize it. And there's how Medicaid fits in and Medicare fits in and, anyway, sorry, go ahead.
If I had a family member who had stage 4 cancer and I would sacrifice almost any amount to get them to live.
Mhm.
And the same is true if it looked like we were up to 28,000 a child for this. I would sacrifice as a parent to do that if I thought the outcome was going to mean my child was successful the rest of the way through school. Do we have that data?
I think that someone from the early childhood community can absolutely come in and share that data with us. And I think they did to some extent in testimony two weeks ago. Was that 2 weeks ago? Was that last week?
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it Janet? No.
Morgan.
It was Morgan from Let's Grow Kids. No,
No,
sorry, from
Building
Building Bright Futures. Oof. Sorry, Morgan.
Can we have that?
Yeah, and it's actually part of our testimony from Morgan that Saoirse can resend the link. Yeah.
I also know that I think the report from the pre-K implementation committee, their report also has some data on kindergarten readiness outcomes in the system. Yeah, so I can share that with Saoirse.
And First Children's Finance just put out a pre-K capacity study that we have not taken testimony on. That was not a statutorily required report. It's just something they did for them. That was more blithe than should have been. Other questions for Ted?
The big one is the assumption of the full weighting for paying the private setting. And we really still don't have a handle on how much exactly pre-K costs the public setting right now.
Yes, Emily, I'm not gonna make any promises. We've been doing work in our office. And we've made some strides in understanding how much the private pre-K or how much tuition payments are, how much spending there is on pre-K. We have some of that data. I think I think parsing through how that intersects with EEE and et cetera, and how that associates with individual students is more complicated. And I don't want to promise too much yet, but we are working on it and we will be able to provide you all with more information.
Any other questions for Ted? Everyone is furiously writing down their questions. We're going to add them to a question list for our next round of testimony. Folks will read through. I think we're going to stop for the morning now.
It's been a lot.
It was a lot. Okay, cool. Okay, we're going to stop for the morning. We'll schedule Emily in to do sort of the next series of testimony on this. And then next week, we'll pick the statutory language up again, to like really flag the pieces that we're gonna work on. So thank you.
Of course, and if you want to sit down and digest and have other questions, like feel free to reach out. And also, I think part of the exercise is when I got it to the end of it is like, yeah, this is hard and confusing and yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to make it there.
I mean, I had a kid who like received, subsidy for both like early care and education and like summer and after school care. And I worked for the child development division and I worked with Building Bright Futures and I still find this incredibly confusing.
Yes. So like, don't be afraid to reach out to us at JFO. Yes.
There is prior research on cost of pre-kindergarten across districts. I think part of the challenge is we don't have clear measures of dosage.
Mhm.
And so even
Yes.
though they're getting the 4 or whatever, that some of them are providing full-time care.
Yes.
And so, and some of them have pre-K coordinators and some don't. So we don't know. What we can tell is which regions are spending more than that.
Yeah, and that's some of what Emily will illuminate when she testifies.
And I guess the question is, if we're gonna do anything, we need to do a better job with baseline data collection.
Agreed. And, yeah. Representative Westbrook.
Sorry, this isn't for Ken.
Oh, you can get out of the chair if you want.
I'm not gonna run. Last year, when we were starting with education transformation, we talked a lot about the uncertainty and the confusion that is our education funding system and our tax system. And part of Act 73 was an effort to simplify that to an extent, and would love if we can carry that spirit of simplification forward as we're doing this. This is just frankly kind of ridiculous.
I mean, the most extreme version of it to me is I know families that drive their, like, that leave work to drive their youth from the, from a pre-K setting to an early care and education setting, like mid-workday. Which is sort of like the physical manifestation of the multiple funding streams.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way, but there's lots of other more complicated pieces of it. Yeah.
And also dual type of regulations.
Yeah.
And we collapsed the after school programming. That
Yeah.
was again, a regulation just.
Yeah. Okay, enjoy your digestion, both your lunches and all the information we just consumed, and see you at 1:15. When we're going back to tax classification.
Boy.
Good.